I feel like I'm just getting in the way. I would have loved for you to stay up there for the next however much longer that we have. But thank you so much for being a part of this amazing Global Women's Leadership Forum. I can't imagine having such an event and not having you, the preeminent leader of our country, here today. And it's a great honor for Terry and for me to have you here, as well as the whole UVA community. As you can tell, this is your room. So we've been talking about, with an amazing panels for the last 2 days, about breaking barriers. Women who have broken barriers, women who are currently breaking barriers, as you say, both locally in their communities, thinking about that higher office, serving in business. What is it, you know, you had some amazing things you said there, but where is it that you find this grit and this resiliency to keep persisting? And by the way, I hope you'll continue. You know, people have asked, some people, not many, why did she write a book? Why do we have to hear a former nominee's never written a book about the election before? And yet I think it has a lot to do with what you just talked about, and I'm grateful for it. So I'd love your thoughts on this particular book topic.
Well, I have to say, I see the book as a book about resilience. Both personal resilience and, you know, political and national resilience. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was devastated by the outcome of the election. I didn't think I was going to win. I didn't think I didn't think I was going to lose. I didn't think that it would happen. I didn't prepare a concession speech. I was just totally taken off guard. And so I really had to, you know, come to grips with that. And so I spent a lot of time, as you probably know, taking walks in the woods and, you know, just being with my family and my friends. We had a great visit with you and Terry at the state capitol. And, you know, I did other things like read mystery novels because the bad guy always gets it in the end. And so, it took time. And then I started seeing a lot of the analysis and commentary about the election, and I didn't recognize it. I thought, well, you know, that's not what I thought happened. Or I think they're really missing it because they're not focusing on a particular factor that I thought was important. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought, okay, I'm going to try to write a book because I may figure out what I think, and it may be of some use or benefit to my, you know, friends and supporters, my voters. And so I just dove into it, and it was very painful at first. You know, I would be writing about something, you know, trying to be as candid as I could be about what I did wrong, what my campaign failed at. But I kept running up against these other factors that were not just unique to me or to my campaign. And in the end, it turned out to be very cathartic. And of course, in the months since, a lot of what I wrote about and warned about has become even clearer to us. So it's not just about personal resilience. I'm a huge believer in admitting that everybody gets knocked down in life, and what matters is whether you get back up. And sometimes you have to get back up more than once, and sometimes it's devastating. You know, everybody suffers loss. You're not going to lose a presidential campaign, maybe, but you're going to lose a loved one, you're going to lose your health, you're going to lose a job, you're going to lose a love. Something will happen. And I've always thought the differences among the people I've known over my life are those who could somehow incorporate and accommodate that, and then figure out how to pull from the deepest part of themselves the resilience to go on. And I admire people like that because they often face the most horrific odds. you've got a leadership group of young people from around the world. And as Secretary of State, I visited 112 countries, and I visited people who just put me, out of breath because of their courage and what they stood up to and what they tried to do on behalf of others. So resilience is a big part of the story. And then I think the resilience about what we do in our nation, because look, without being partisan, I think we're facing some very difficult decisions. And we're facing some serious assaults on truth and facts and evidence and reason. There is no such thing as an alternative fact. There just isn't. And so, when a leader tells you something contrary to what you can see with your own eyes, like the size of an inauguration crowd, the first time it happens, you might think, well, that's just weird or whatever. But when it keeps happening, then those of you who study history know that trying to blur the line between fact and fiction is what dictators and authoritarians do. They want you to see the reality they want you to see. And we can't let that happen. So resilience is something that has always been a part of our national character, but I think now, maybe more than ever for a very long time, we're going to have to dig deep and stand up against the kind of assaults on the rule of law and the subversion of democracy and the coordination with foreign powers and all the stuff that we're now seeing in real time being revealed. And I have a lot of optimism that we'll get through this, but we won't unless people, not just leaders, but citizens, make it clear they're going to stand up and speak out and be part of pushing back.
So you mentioned our elections last Tuesday here in the Commonwealth, and we did increase the number of women in our state legislature by 67%. Yeah. The bad news was we started at a very low number, but hey, gains are gains, and we're very excited about that. But I have to wonder, personally, I know you were very excited about the election and what it means for the Commonwealth, having followed the Commonwealth so closely in recent years. But how did it feel knowing that your loss, in some ways, truly inspired women to take that leap, to step outside of their comfort zone, whether they had the resources or didn't, but just said, and it was a combination. Yeah. How did you view that night, besides Terry's and my jubilation? And
look, I thought it was about as close to a silver lining as you can get. I think that, as I describe in the book, the contrast between the inauguration and then the next day, the march, was something that I think began a movement that so many people, and particularly women, want to be part of. So I started an organization called Onward Together, which funds some of these young, dynamic, grassroots organizations that are recruiting candidates, training candidates, helping to fund and direct campaigns for them. So I was thrilled, because that's what it's going to take. And unless we have people actually running for these offices, we can't win. And for the first time, you saw people who really made a stand. They were first-time candidates. They were motivated. They were maybe upset or discouraged and wanting to do something to get over it, whatever their particular reason might be. It was a really good sign. Now we have to keep it up. It is sometimes hard to sustain that level of energy in the face of negativity. You know, when you are, you know, facing the kinds of attacks or criticism or dismissiveness that is too much a part of our politics, you know, it's probably a lot easier just to say, I'm not going to put up with it, I'm not even going to participate. And what we saw on Tuesday was the first marker laid down that people are not going to quit. We're not going to quit on this. We're not going to give up on this. We cannot tolerate what is happening, the kinds of things that are being said and done. So I was thrilled because I don't think in our country, unless we have massive war or a Great Depression, we make huge changes quickly. We are much more, you know, pounding it out step by step, making a difference, holding your ground, keeping going. And I think what happened on Tuesday was a sign of that, and now the people who are elected have to keep faith with those who voted for them.
Well, and I do want to make a point, I don't know if you know, but the turnout on grounds here was historic. I talked to members of the Civic Engagement Task Force, 60% increase, I think, in voter turnout. And going to your point of the importance of civic engagement, the importance of our next generation to not be turned off by the noise. Right. I think that's a real concern. I find it in my own community of friends sometimes to just say, I can't listen, it's too much. So how do we break through that?
Well, no, I'm well aware of that because, you know, it was massively depressing and discouraging for a lot of the people who had supported me in the election. And, you know, there's been a lot of writing about how, you know, doctors saw more people reporting anxiety and depression symptoms than they've seen in a long time because it's hard. And you feel like, what's wrong with me? I mean, how can I, you know, how can I just pretend like nothing's happened? Well, you don't have to pretend like nothing's happened. You have to embrace what happened and be determined to be part of changing what happened. And that's what I'm encouraged by because, you know, two of the groups that I support, Emerge America and Run for Something, had women candidates running for the first time. And usually, you know, the percentage of first-time candidates that win is about 10%. But in this case, about 50% of first-time candidates won. And here in Virginia, candidates affiliated with both those groups and others that were on the ground kept going and didn't get discouraged. So it's important to have a supportive network of people who kind of don't just vent, but, you know, organize in your local community. And there's lots of things to be done. One area that I want to give, you know, another shout out to Terry is when Virginia saw, what everybody saw, that our voting machines could be hacked so easily, Virginia decided to move to paper ballots. More states need to do that. Our voting machines are not safe and secure. Maybe we can get new ones that would be, but right now we need a paper trail and we need paper ballots and we need more states to follow Virginia's example.
And very true, as we still have a recount in 3 of our districts ongoing. So what, you know, we've talked these past 2 days about gender, race, religion, economic barriers of all kinds, barriers to democracy. What can you say about how do we talk to that next generation, even younger perhaps, maybe reinvigorating our commitment to civics and engaging and to each other? When we're going to have to go around, I think, a current bully pulpit that we have. And what are your ideas for how we do that? And how might you be involved in doing that?
Well, look, I think I'm actually very encouraged by young people, and I'll just talk about Americans, but young Americans are much more inclusive, non-discriminatory, more valuing of diversity, the experience of connecting with people in person and online across all kinds of barriers is something that young people kind of take for granted. So I think that the base is there, but there isn't a lot of formal education, as you say, about civics. And I saw during the campaign a lot of confusion and lack of information about the basic fundamentals of, voting, of governing, of why you can't just decide you want something to happen and make it happen. I mean, there was a lot of questioning, and so there is work to be done, and I think a lot of it has to be done in our schools and certainly our colleges and in our public venues, and that includes online, because if young people are given the chance to believe that their participation will matter and will affect their futures, we're going to get better results. And I think you saw that in Virginia. You saw a big increase in young voters, and you saw the impact of, two very stark visions, and the kinds of divisive, negative advertising that was, trying to stir people's fears and get them to hate and scapegoat others, versus a much steadier, more predictable vision about what could be done in Virginia. And I think young people roundly rejected the divisiveness and the darkness and the danger that was trying to be marketed. So we just have to pay more attention to this, and part of the reason I'm supporting these other groups is they're all led by young people. They're all led by people in their 20s and their 30s, people who themselves are just passionate about trying to make a difference in their communities. And I want to stress that this doesn't all have to be at the national level or even the state level. There's so much work to be done at the local level, and people who are following what's going on, like the paper ballot issue, can have a big impact if you are involved with an organization. I'm a big fan of Indivisible, because Indivisible did the work of trying to convince Americans going to town halls was important, and then helping to train people about how you go to a town hall and how you interact with a member of Congress and what are the questions you have to ask, and get prepared. So this kind of organizing from the ground up is exactly what we need, and nobody's better at that than young people. And so I hope there will be even more opportunities for us to actually, see greater and greater involvement.
So switch gears a little bit. So one theme in your book was that after such a long, amazing life of service and public service and running for office, that at times you felt like you were walking a tightrope without a safety net. Now that you've been on a book tour, you've been very busy, but time is passing, and just wondering if you're feeling like you're seeing that opportunity to not be on that tightrope, and that it might be freeing. And I wonder, is it really freeing to you because of your 40-year commitment to doing the right thing in service to others? Well,
it is. As I write in the book, I wanted to pull the curtain back on one of the wildest elections in American history, and I did. I have felt very much as though I was on a tightrope and had to be careful about what I said and had to keep my guard up, and those days are gone. And so my view is that I can best help to shape the debate by being right in the middle of it. And it was funny because after the election, obviously I saw the articles, I heard the newscasters saying, "Oh my gosh, why doesn't she just go away?" And if they'd left me alone, I might have gone away, right? I mean, but I got to thinking, I don't remember them ever telling Mitt Romney to go away, or John McCain, or John Kerry, or Al Gore. I don't remember that happening. And I did get more votes than anybody in American history other than Barack Obama in 2008. So, I really feel such a responsibility for, all the people who believed in me and voted for me, and I thought, well, I'd be kind of letting them down. And the most common thing on this book tour, especially at the book signings, because, I see about 1,000 people in a couple of hours, are people who say, oh, I'm so glad you didn't go away. And I said, well, I really, after thinking about it, didn't have a choice. I'm not going anywhere. And apparently, the current occupant of the Oval Office and the press seem to think I am the president, because they are constantly talking, particularly on Fox, about the Clinton administration. And I'm going, what are they talking about? And
don't we wish?
So I'm going to have some fun with it. I'm going to try to fend off harmful things. I was really involved in doing what I could to prevent the repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act. I do know a little bit about health care, and I know it is complicated. And so, for 7 years, all you heard was repeal and replace, and it's like the dog catching the car. They catch the car, then they all look at each other like, what does that mean? What on earth did that mean, right? So, there were a lot of just surreal moments. Probably one of the most, if you remember the picture of all those elderly, white-haired, white men sitting around a table trying to decide what health care women should get, right? And some of them reportedly saying things like, well, I'm never going to have a baby. Why do I have to pay for maternal health care? I mean, honestly, someone needs to talk to that gentleman. And kind of maybe he's never had the talk, but somebody needs to talk to him. I'm gonna keep speaking out. Obviously, I am just totally gobsmacked about their tax bill, which is nothing but a budget-busting, debt blowing up giveaway to a really small number of people. And as I recall during the campaign, my opponent would repeatedly say, oh, I'm never going to touch Medicare and I'm never going to touch Medicaid. Well, indeed, based on the last figures I've seen, it changes so quickly it may change again. They would cut about, $600-700 million out of Medicare and about $1 trillion out of Medicaid, further taking away health care from people in order to satisfy their donors. Now, I'm not saying politics is pure, and I'm not saying people don't pay attention to who funds them, which is why it would be really great if we could get to public financing, because it's crazy the way we fund our democracy. However, to blatantly say, as a congressman from Western New York said, well, I got to pass that tax bill, even though it would really hurt a lot of the people who live in his district, and their taxes would go up, and the state and local tax deduction would be gone, even though it would hurt the very people he represents. He said, well, I don't know. He said, I got to do it for my donors because they said if I don't, I can't call them anymore. Honestly, how do you live with yourself? So I'm going to continue to play a role the best I can in speaking out, particularly about issues that I think are important to the country. I am really concerned about the Children's Health Insurance Program because I was involved in getting it started back in the 90s on a bipartisan basis, and it hasn't been reauthorized, and 9 million kids get their health care through CHIP. And states are going to have to start cutting back because the deal was federal government would be funding state efforts to actually help subsidize kids with chronic conditions, congenital, traumatic conditions. So I'm not going anywhere. And, my attitude is, when these guys, and they're all guys basically, when they say, go away, whatever, You don't have to listen to me. I'm not asking you to do that. But I'm not going to, walk away from the debates that I've been involved in my entire adult life. And I'm not going to walk away when our country is at risk of undermining so much of the progress that we have made for people. So that's the way I feel about it.
Thank you. Thank you for not walking away, and we know you won't. Thank you for the Children's Health Insurance Plan. It's about 70,000 children here in the Commonwealth of Virginia that benefit from that plan, and I just can't imagine these guys thinking that children don't demand a right to health care. So internationally, incredible Secretary of State, so many amazing programs, strategy, empowerment of women and girls. If Terry was just at the climate conference with 4 governors who have, joined the U.S. Climate Alliance, where the United States has backed out of the Paris Accord. Mayors were there. I think 15 governors now have signed on. In terms of women and girls empowerment and bringing young men along with them, and thinking of 130 million women, young girls, with no access to education, but all you did. How can we go around and to continue to make sure that we're there for the rest of the world, and we're partners with the rest of the world? And what is your lens as Secretary of State? We have the former president of Kosovo here, who is worried about her country and the lack of leadership in the United States.
Well, and I'm very happy to see my friend, the former president of Kosovo, who I had the privilege of working with. I think we are sacrificing our competitive advantage under this administration. And we're sacrificing it across the board. We're clearly sacrificing the moral high ground, the values debate that we have always represented, arguing for human rights, standing up to dictators and taking on some of the worst problems in the world to try to help resolve conflict and deal with human rights abuses. But even if you were to make the argument that that's not critical to our future, you're missing the big picture, because we are sacrificing our lead in key areas that will be absolutely essential to the economy going forward, and you mentioned one. Right now, with the decision by Syria to join the Paris Agreement, we are the only country not included. And it is nothing but a giveaway to fossil fuel interests by the current administration, who seem not to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, because the clear imperative under Paris was not to immediately shut every fossil fuel production facility or generation facility down, but to work diligently to get to as close a endpoint as you possibly could by increasing clean renewable energy and doing your utmost best to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, other countries, most notably China, are going full speed ahead, because they're not shutting their coal plants yet, but they are ramping up their solar and their wind operations, because they want to be the world's major exporter. They want to dominate that market. They take technology we created and pioneered and are basically going into, reverse engineering and creating new models. So even if you don't care about climate change, even if you don't look at the pictures of people literally choking on poisonous gases in New Delhi, or walking around Beijing with masks on, even if you don't pay attention to that or think, oh, that's their problem, not ours, even though we are a global ecosystem, why would we give up that economic advantage? It makes no sense. So you can go issue by issue, and you can see the United States ceding leadership, economic leadership, strategic leadership, moral leadership. And certainly when it comes to women and girls, we started when I was secretary the first ever office for the Global Women's Ambassador. And we did it not just because, I think it's a nice thing to do. We did it because the evidence is compelling that supporting women's rights and opportunities is good for democracy, it's good for the United States, it creates consumers, again, if all you're interested in is the economy. It creates more opportunities to deal with and end conflicts. You can go down a long list. So this administration is totally uninterested. What's happening in the State Department is tragic. Shutting the State Department down, sort of office by office by office. Offering buyouts of $25,000 to people who have deep language and cultural and historical expertise is foolish. And so there's so much going on that is damaging the infrastructure of our government and damaging our standing overseas, that it is giving a big advantage to countries that don't share our values, countries with whom we are adversarial. So I think it's the women and girls piece is a part of the larger picture. And I'm very, I'm very worried. And I can only say that having, negotiated with, met with a lot of the leaders who are still there, because they are self-perpetuating, there is no doubt in my mind that they feel they've been given a lot of room to run. And they believe that they are playing our current administration. And they're thrilled by it. Because the more we do to damage ourselves, the better off they will be. And if we don't take seriously our economic challenges and our strategic challenges, including upping our game on cyber offense and defense, we're going to be left crippled. And we will pay a price. For a long time, early on when I was talking about the Russians and nobody was listening to me, and we started doing it during the campaign, and people were like, oh yeah, right, the Russians. It was so unprecedented that it was really difficult for the press to even grasp. So now we know a lot more than we used to know, and we obviously can see that the Russians, this didn't just happen overnight. It didn't just happen because Putin disliked and feared me. It happened because he was aiming at undermining democracy. And, the former president of Kosovo knows this is what they do. They are good at it. And, if we're on our game, we're good at it too. But if we don't even play, or we throw in our towel, or we basically deny it, it could not be more dangerous, because they will continue to sow discord among Americans. And if you look, they used Facebook, they used Google, they used Twitter, they used Instagram, they even used Pinterest. I don't know exactly how, but they did. They used Pinterest to post and write divisive messages to set Americans against each other. They were involved in promoting and amplifying the message in Charlottesville out of the white supremacists. A lot of these white supremacists admire Putin. They think of him as kind of the macho icon of white supremacy. And he knows that. He is no fool. But he's a former KGB colonel, and he understands how to play the influence game. And when our president basically says, well, he told me he didn't do it, and, I believe him, it is so beyond weird that you don't even know what to say. But it cries out for serious investigation. And I want to do a shout out to your two senators, my wonderful running mate Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, who's done a great job on this.
And to that, we have leadership or not at the federal level. But then we have, you saw the testimony and the response when our social media giants were brought in to Congress. And I just wonder, what did you think of the response there? Because I do think we have to say there's responsibility across the landscape here.
Well, I think we're just at the beginning of understanding exactly what happened with the technology companies. Initially they just denied everything. I remember one of the first responses was Facebook saying that, they found 450 sites and they shut them down. And then like a week or two later, it came out that they shut 50,000 sites in France during the French election. So, none of it made sense. So the tech companies, I think, were not aware of how they were being used at first. I mean, after a while, if you're getting paid in rubles, I think you should probably figure it out. But, there were some sort of benchmarks along the way. So now every day that goes by, we learn more. And just yesterday, Theresa May, the Prime Minister in the UK, called out the tech companies and called out Russia for what is now emerging as their influence campaign to get Brits to vote to get out of the EU, the Brexit vote. Now, Putin's strategy is to break up the EU, break up NATO, undermine democracy, demonstrate that authoritarian, strong male leaders are the better way to go. And he makes no, he makes no apologies for it. This is what he's always believed. But we cannot be complicit, and that includes our government, and that includes our private sector, and in particular, our tech companies. Because if we are complicit in our own subversion, shame on us. I mean, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on us, right? And now we know how they're using it. And some of it is so obvious. I think there was some reporting, Terry, that, here in Virginia, the Russian bots were out in full force, a couple of days before the election. All of these weirdly worded tweets, with things like putting the $ behind the number instead of in front of it, or odd syntax, which is very much somebody trying to convey a thought in English for whom it's not a natural language. So we can see this now, and we have to pay attention. And the tech companies, when they were under pressure to get rid of child pornography, did a pretty good job. So now they've got to protect our democracy against foreign intervention. If we want to argue with each other, all bets are off. You know what? I'm on Twitter. Somebody goes after me, fine. That's their right. But if they don't disclose, they're not identified, they're paying to promote a fabrication, people need to know that. And then, people have to make up their own minds, whether it's important to you or not. So I think we're only at the beginning of trying to figure out what the responsibility of the tech companies should be. And, Senator Warner and a few of his colleagues are really, on top of that. And I don't know if they can get anything passed, but I will say this, and Republicans better understand this. Putin is no long-lasting friend. If he thinks he can make some kind of advance by going after Republicans, he will. And when the Congress passed tough sanctions on Russia because of what we were learning about their interference in our election, and I will say they affected the outcome. You know, people say, well, they may have interfered, but they didn't affect the outcome. What do you think advertising is for? It's to affect how you think, and in elections, how you vote. And so they affected the outcome, and we saw, you know, the impact of that and the ongoing impact of it, but it is by no means clear yet everything they did. And the tech companies have to help us figure that out, because, you know, when the sanctions were passed, Trump didn't want to sign them. He was forced to sign them, but he's never implemented them. And I would bet, if I were a betting person, that was raised in his conversation with Putin. Because Putin is certainly grateful for that, because what does Putin care most about? He cares most about getting access to his money and the money of the oligarchs around him. They have amassed unbelievable fortunes. We have some hints to it because of some of the disclosures that have come in the Panama Papers and this latest, you know, drop of papers. They own real estate, they've laundered money, they have huge financial stakes outside of Russia. So sanctions can be effective. And that's why, you know, he doesn't want the sanctions enforced, and why part of his dealings, as we're now understanding with representatives of the Trump campaign, was to get the existing sanctions lifted. So the tech companies have got to decide whose side they're on. And they are thriving companies because they're American companies. It was the American economy, the American entrepreneurial spirit that gave them the opportunity for, you know, a Russian kid to help start Google, for people to leave their countries and come to Silicon Valley to be part of the tech revolution. That could not and did not happen anywhere else. And they'd better stand up and speak out and take action to protect our democracy.
Well, our time is up. I'm very sorry to say, because I could do this all afternoon, and I think I speak for the audience. But I also speak for the audience, I do believe, when I say thank you for continuing to speak up. You could be playing with Aiden and Charlotte right now and have your foot up on a stool, but that's not you. And we're very grateful for being here and for all your contributions, and we're looking forward to the future. All right.
Thank you all.